Hello, I'm LegenTerry and, wow. That, blew up pretty fast, huh? Well, might have missed the big wave on this one. For the 3 people left in the room that haven't jumped in yet, this is Palworld. I've played about 50 hours of it in the span of a week. It's definitely not what you expect, unless you came here knowing what to expect, in which case, welcome, fellow tamer. It might look like it's for kids, but it's probably a good time to say that it's really not. There's no real blood or gore, but it just feels really violent at times, you know? There's also some slightly questionable things that you can do that your kids might ask you about, but hey, you parent the way that you want to parent. Stick around and we'll talk about that stuff later in the video. So, formalities first. Palworld is an early access title made by Pocket Pair, a fairly small indie studio from Japan. You might have heard their name attached to Craftopia, a crafting and survival game that takes a lot of inspiration from other properties, and does a lot of pretty unconventional stuff to middling success. And Palworld, well, Palworld is derivative of other properties to the point of becoming parody. Pokemon with guns! There, I said the stupid thing. Happy now? I'm not going to get into the accusations of plagiarism and the potential use of AI against the developers. That's way beyond the scope of this video. If Nintendo and the Pokemon Company have a problem with the contents of this game, I am sure they can handle themselves in court. And I'll just say that shouting, "Trust me bro," as evidence that AI was ever used to make this game is not a form of actual evidence. Moving on. Palworld takes all the lessons Pocket Pair learned making Craftopia and shoves a bunch of legally distinct creatures under the hood. It asks the question, what would a world inhabited by creatures with magical powers that we can tame and control for our own benefit actually look like? How exploitable would they really be? And what if you all had guns? And here we are. It's easy to write off Palworld as a meme or streamer bait, but believe me, that's doing this game a massive disservice. The core gameplay loop of Palworld is a very far cry from the turn-based Pokemon games their creature designs are heavily inspired by. If anything, it seems like Pocket Pair started development on Palworld after looking at games like Ark, Valheim, and Pokemon Legends Arceus and said, yeah, we can probably pull that off. Why do I specifically mention Pokemon Legends Arceus? If you played it, you already know that it was a lot different from the main series, and way more action-oriented. You had to go on excursions out into the wilderness, craft your own Pokeballs and items from raw materials, and catch multiple copies of the same Pokemon species for research purposes. You even fought some big boss Pokemon in real-time combat by tossing bags full of medicinal substances at them before challenging them to a normal Pokemon battle. It was a breath of fresh air, and the biggest departure Game Freak and the Pokemon Company have made from their unbelievably ancient-feeling rituals in years, only to be held back by their lack of technical prowess and unwillingness to move on to an engine that didn't start its life on the 3DS. This is the open door that Palworld was able to squeeze its way in through. But I hear you. Everyone and their mother has compared this game to Pokemon. It's old, it's tired, get it out of here. So let's cut the rhetoric and talk about what it does differently and how it holds itself up to scrutiny. Strap in because there's a lot to talk about. And maybe be a pal yourself by liking the video and getting subscribed. It tells YouTube that I'm working hard and that my videos are worth sending to more people. First and foremost, Palworld is a survival game. A surprisingly deep survival game with tons of moving parts. One quick glance at all the technology upgrades is enough to overwhelm even the most seasoned of survival game players, and that's barely scratching the surface. You can play with a group of people, but the numbers you can play with kinda fluctuate between Xbox and PC. Again, it's early access. That also gives them an easy out for the abysmal state of the audio in the game across both the music and sound effects departments, which I desperately hope are just placeholders. Like always, you start by collecting rocks and wood and building some simple tools and structures. Except here, that also includes pal spheres that you catch the pals in, and they'll fight alongside you one at a time against other wild pals. Your character is actually an active participant in fights, and your pal will use whatever attacks they have off cooldown. You're not really commanding them in a fight because you're too busy swinging, shooting, dodging, and throwing pal spheres. Each pal has a set list of items it can drop when they die or get captured. Some give you pieces of meat or eggs for cooking, some give you wool or leather for clothes, and some give you bones or organs for crafting. Battling, collecting resources, and crafting things all give XP, and each level up unlocks character skill points and technology points. These both give you extremely important choices to make. Early on, you will want to dump everything into carrying capacity skills so you don't get over-encumbered constantly. Starfield, eat your heart out. And tech points allow you to choose new craftable items and upgrades to your bases. Further down the tech tree, you'll even unlock items that let you use extra abilities with specific pals out in the field. For example, some pals can be used as rideable mounts, while others can be used as weapons in combat. And this is where the real fun starts to happen in Palworld. You get some skills and some items, and then you set up a base. And as you collect more pals, you can assign them to work and grab resources within the radius surrounding the base. Each pal has a short list of things they can do depending on their species, called work suitability, and then a set of randomly rolled traits that give them bonuses or flaws. You might get a pal with Artisan that lets them complete their tasks really quick, or you might get one with Coward that makes it suck at attacking. If you want the best pals, you'll probably have to catch quite a few of the same species before landing on something solid. Now, you'll probably want to set your base up pretty close to the starting area to get the ball rolling, but once you start adventuring, you'll start to realize just how massive the world in this game is. Your progress doesn't get impeded for very long, and once you pick up things like the glider and pals that you can ride, the only limit is how good you are at avoiding aggressive high-level pals. Not to say that it's the smartest thing to do, but it's cool that Palworld lets you. However, this is where one of Palworld's weaker points lies. While the world looks like it has endless potential, it's practically barren. There aren't that many interesting things to find besides the pals themselves and some resource nodes. There are landmarks that seem important, but there's no reason to approach them besides getting a closer look, saying, huh, I guess that's kinda neat, and then moving on. Like, there are no NPCs or ancient signposts to tell me what this giant statue arrangement of two epic-looking pals clashing over a bridge is all about. It just seems weird. The most exciting bits of content you'll stumble upon are some randomly generated dungeons with a prefabricated tile set and some syndicate camps that keep a random pal in a cage for you to save and take with you once you eliminate the threats. The dungeons are a bit underwhelming, as you see the same rooms over and over ad nauseum, but there's always a big boss version of a pal waiting at the end, along with a couple of chests that offer unique rewards. In the later areas, these become almost maze-like with no mini-map to follow, which is a real bummer. You'll also probably encounter a lot of glitches the more you travel, and I'm not sure if that's a console version problem or if it's widespread across both platforms. On multiple occasions, I found myself clipping through walls or floors that didn't render correctly and saw gaping holes and sharp edges in the geography that needed fixing. If I had to hazard a guess, I'd say that a lot of the land was probably randomly generated before someone went back in and reworked it by hand, but a lot of spots obviously missed this polish. There's also a bug that shows up and makes some of the skyboxes flash, potentially being dangerous to folks who are prone to epileptic seizures. Again, this isn't a final product, and it's a lot of work to tackle for an indie dev, but these are things that gotta get fixed ASAP. But let's take a step back. Before you go out exploring, you'll probably want to start with the basics. Stockpiling wood, stone, and other resources, and starting to automate as much of the process as possible with your working pals. It feels like the true focus of the game is on the crafting and the base building elements, and you can really get invested into the process if you want to. I'm talking about production at a massive scale with your little guys. Myself and a friend have probably spent 30 hours just optimizing the pals we employed, making them create all the materials we have a regular need for. When you're playing for yourself, just be sure to provide them with food and good working conditions, or they'll start getting hungry, injured, or incapacitated, needing to be placed back in the PC box for some time to recover. Or you could just rule over your pals like a cruel dictator. Embrace your inner Jeff Bezos and turn your facilities into meat grinders with rotating doors, if you catch my drift. And if food gets scarce, well, that meat grinder part isn't just metaphorical. If that sounds dark, it is. But it could always get darker. So let's talk about the people that live in Palworld. Every now and then your bases get raided, either by destructive pals or enemy human NPCs looking to wreck your stuff. Now, understandably, these get pretty annoying, and if you're anything like me, you might just turn off enemy raids in the server settings because you don't want to deal with all of your stuff getting broken while you're away from Mother Base. But you could always set up some defensive measures and have your pals protect your stuff with their lives. If you want to go a step further, you can even capture humans with pal spheres. Any humans, as long as they're not players. And you can deal with them however you please, even if it's not morally sound. They can perform the same laborious tasks as their pal counterparts, but they're not quite as handy, so maybe you just cut them from the team. Or do other things. Look, we don't talk about Fight Club, alright? Remember, it's just a video game, not real life. Unfortunately, in the game's current state, the pathing AI for your pals tends to get a little bit messy. There's no dedicated do this button when you walk up to a workbench or a furnace, so the pals end up wandering off to do whatever their many work suitability stats say they can. There is a mechanic where you can pick them up and throw them at what you want them to do, but it's extremely broken and doesn't work correctly about 90% of the time. If there's one update to this game that I desperately want after they get done patching all the bugs and the holes in the ground, it's a way to remedy this problem. Anyways, we're running a bit off the rails, so let's talk about your main objectives here. There's not really a story outside the occasional lore cards that you can find and read, but when you first enter the game, you find a digital notepad that says something about towers being the key and a tree holding the truth. If you do run into any people early on, chances are that they'll be members of a syndicate who attack you on sight. Those guys have leaders, and the leaders hang out in big glowing towers sprinkled around the world. There are 5 in total, and they act as the definitely not gym leader main bosses that you have to defeat to beat the game. They're no slouches, and each one escalates in difficulty. Defeating the first one will be the final step in your tutorials, but be wary. You should really spend some time preparing for the fight before wandering in blindly. You'll probably want to have a full squad of pals around level 10 to 15 and be heavily armed, because there's a 10-minute time limit on the fight. Though, if you can put out enough damage, the boss is quite cheesable. And that goes for a lot of the encounters in the game. I assume that'll change when pathing and enemy AI gets improved later down the road, but for now, enemies seem to spend more time fighting the walls and slightly elevated ledges than they actually do fighting you. The combat also isn't fleshed out particularly well. While your pals do most of the heavy lifting, you're relegated to chipping away at health bars with wimpy melee weapons and underpowered bows for far longer than I expected. For a game whose trailers displayed a firearm in almost every frame, Palworld doesn't actually seem that trigger happy once you dive in. You can't even unlock a musket until you're at least level 21, and yes, just like in real life, it takes days to reload. Honestly, you're better off sticking with a crossbow until you get access to better rifles near the level 40 mark, because the crafting economy for gun ammunition is prohibitively expensive early on. Arrows maintain the same cost of some stone and wood throughout the entire leveling process, but crafting ammo eats into your precious iron ingots, which are used in almost every other crafting pattern. There have gotta be some adjustments done, either by decreasing the amount of iron ore used for everything across the board, or increasing the amount of ammo generated by each craft. I mean, I kinda get it, the game wants to push you into actually using and relying on your pals' extra abilities for combat, and once you craft some of the required pieces and gain access to some of the cooler ones, it can really elevate the way you fight. Whether it's picking one up to use as a flamethrower, riding one into a fight and aiming their attacks yourself, or just using one like an elementally charged grenade, there are plenty of absurd ways to stave off the monotony. The only drawback is that you probably want to catch a lot of these pals that you're fighting, and that goal is diametrically opposed to letting your overpowered pals run wild. Unless you recall them back into their sphere early, they will continue trying to massacre whatever you toss them at. And judging when that moment should happen becomes really tricky, because if you call them back too early, the enemy pal focuses 100% of its attention back on you while you slowly plink away its remaining health with some arrows or bullets. You're going to get real familiar with that dodge button and keeping an extra sphere at the ready just in case it breaks out. All that being said, it isn't terrible. Perfectly timing your dodges to get invincibility frames always feels pretty good, even if trying to reload slower weapons turns into a chore. I just wish there were a bit more variety in the way that you have to fight different pals and humans. A strength and weakness chart only takes combat so far when the most you yourself are doing is watching on the sidelines and waiting until the enemy stays still long enough to line up headshots. Palworld isn't anywhere near a perfect video game, especially in its early access state, but it's got a strong start and some legs that'll carry it forwards for a while. I can see there being plenty of potential for future fixes and content, and they already have a short roadmap being planned as we speak. I just hope that it isn't a flash in the pan. I don't think I can really justify putting a final score on Palworld. It just doesn't make sense in the context of it being an early access title. It could take them as little as a few months or as long as a couple years to reach the point in development where they call it a full release. But if I were to grade it as is, I'd probably give it a strong 6.5 out of 10. It's very fun and extremely addicting, but it's currently too unstable and lacking a lot of features and content. If you have a group to play with, you'll probably get a good couple of weeks out of it, and hey, that's more than anyone really anticipated from the game that gives your nostalgia guns.
you.